Horror movies have introduced some of the most terrifying monsters ever imagined. Creatures so powerful, relentless, or unnatural that surviving an encounter with them would be almost impossible. Some hunt for sport, some can't be killed, and others don't even need to touch you to destroy you. In this video, we'll be taking a closer look at movie monsters you realistically cannot survive, breaking down how they hunt, what makes them so deadly, and whether there's any possible way to escape once they've targeted you. From unstoppable monsters and cosmic entities to creatures that attack psychologically, physically, or sometimes both, these are monsters you do not want to encounter. So with that being said, buckle up, because tonight we're looking at movie monsters you definitely cannot survive. Clover, the massive creature from the movie Cloverfield, is one of the most catastrophic movie monsters ever shown on screen. Not just because of its size, but because surviving it becomes nearly impossible no matter where you are. Unlike many creatures that hunt individuals, Clover functions more like a living natural disaster, tearing through entire city blocks while causing mass panic, military collapse, and thousands of deaths within only a few hours. The creature itself is an enormous deep-sea organism, estimated to stand between 240 and 300 feet tall while moving on all fours, with an even greater height when standing upright. Its pale gray skin, long limbs, massive tail, and horrifying fish-like face make it look completely alien despite technically being a terrestrial animal forced onto land. Its body is also covered in thousands of smaller parasitic creatures roughly the size of dogs, creating a horrifying second layer of danger beyond the monster itself. And honestly, those parasites may be more terrifying than Clover itself. These smaller creatures move in coordinated packs, hide in enclosed areas like subway tunnels and buildings, climb walls and ceilings like spiders, and attack humans on sight. Victims bitten by them don't just normally die. The infection rapidly causes dizziness, internal bleeding, vomiting blood, and eventually a violent expansion of the body before the victim literally explodes from the inside. What makes Clover essentially unsurvivable is that there's no real safe zone once the attack begins. The military throws tanks, missiles, bombs, helicopters, and overwhelming firepower at the creature with little effect for most of the film. Buildings collapse, streets become death traps, bridges fail, subways fill with parasites, and even evacuation routes quickly become overcrowded or destroyed. And because Clover itself behaves more like a terrified, enraged animal than a calculated predator, its movements become unpredictable and impossible to anticipate. If you somehow found yourself in a Cloverfield-style event, your only realistic chance of survival would be immediate evacuation before the military quarantine fully collapses. Avoid underground tunnels entirely, stay away from enclosed spaces where parasites may gather, and get as far away from major urban centers as possible. Fighting either Clover or the parasites directly would be almost pointless, because with Clover you're not surviving a monster encounter, you're surviving the collapse of an entire city. The Death Angels from A Quiet Place are one of the most terrifying movie monsters ever created, because surviving them requires perfection every second of the day, and the moment you even make the smallest mistake, you die. Unlike many creatures that hunt selectively or can be reasoned with, the Death Angels operate entirely on instinct, attacking anything that produces sound with overwhelming speed and brutality. Their arrival alone was enough to collapse human civilization within a matter of months. These creatures arrived on Earth inside meteorites, surviving the impact due to their near indestructible armor and biology, adapted for an extreme world with harsher gravity and no light. Because they evolved in complete darkness, they are completely blind. But to compensate, they developed incredibly sensitive hearing, capable of detecting even the faintest noise from long distances away. A dropped object, a whisper, a footstep, a crying child, or even a ringing phone is enough to immediately attract them. Physically, the Death Angels are absolute nightmares. Their bodies are covered in armor strong enough to resist gunfire, explosives, missiles, and most conventional weapons. They move on all fours with terrifying speed, can leap great distances, climb walls and ceilings, tear through steel barriers, and effortlessly overpower humans. And what makes them even worse is that they don't seem to kill for food. They kill almost purely as an instinctive reaction to sound itself. meaning there's no negotiating, distracting them emotionally, or hoping they'll lose interest once they catch you. What makes Death Angels nearly impossible to survive isn't just the monsters themselves, it's the lifestyle they force humanity into. In their world, survival means living in near complete silence forever. You cannot scream, you cannot run loudly, you cannot accidentally drop something in your own home. Every daily activity becomes life-threatening. One small mistake from anyone around you can instantly bring death to your location. Even military forces struggled to stop them. Tanks, firearms, bombs, and heavy weaponry were almost ineffective because of their armor. Entire cities collapsed within days of the invasion. And once one Death Angel hears something, others often follow shortly after, meaning a single noise can quickly turn into multiple creatures converging on the same area. There's technically one known weakness. Their sensitive hearing can be overloaded with high-frequency sound waves, forcing their armored head plates to open and exposing vulnerable flesh underneath. But realistically, most people would never discover this weakness before being killed. And even if you did, successfully using it under pressure while remaining silent enough to kill it is another challenge entirely. So if you existed in the world of A Quiet Place, survival wouldn't depend on strength. It would depend on whether you could stay silent every hour of every day for the rest of your life. And eventually, almost nobody can do that perfectly. The graboids from Tremors may almost seem goofy at first glance, compared to other movie monsters at least, but realistically surviving them would be an absolute nightmare. Unlike creatures that simply chase you around on land, graboids turn the ground itself into hostile territory. The moment they detect movement beneath you, nowhere feels safe anymore. These massive subterranean predators can grow over 30 feet long, weigh up to 20 tons, and move underground at speeds faster than a human can run. They hunt using an extremely advanced vibration sensing system, meaning every footstep, vehicle engine, voice, or movement immediately gives away your position. And because they spend nearly their entire lives beneath the surface, victims often don't even realize they're being hunted until the ground erupts beneath them. Physically, graboids are terrifyingly powerful. Their armored bodies allows them to smash through concrete, drag vehicles underground, collapse buildings, and overpower large animals with ease. Their primary method of attack involves massive snake-like tentacles called grabbers, which extend from their mouths to seize prey and drag it directly in their jaws. And perhaps worst of all, they're intelligent. Throughout the films, graboids repeatedly learn from failed attacks, adapt to traps, and change tactics after observing human behavior. What makes them especially difficult to survive is the traditional escape methods only work temporarily. Climbing onto rooftops, rocks, or vehicles may buy you time. But the graboids are patient ambush predators. If they can't reach you immediately, they'll often wait hours or even days for you to make a mistake. And if they can undermine the structure beneath you, they simply collapse it instead. There are weaknesses, technically. Loud explosions can overwhelm their vibration-sensitive senses, and they struggle with solid rock or terrain they cannot burrow through effectively. Fast vehicles and horses have also managed to outrun them in some situations. But realistically, unless you already know exactly what you're dealing with and happen to be near stable high ground or transportation, most people would never survive their first encounter. And somehow, the graboids get even worse once you realize a giant underground worm isn't actually the final stage of their life cycle. One of the most horrifying aspects of the creatures in the Tremors franchise is that they constantly evolve into new forms, with each stage developing completely different abilities that makes them even harder to survive. What starts as a single underground predator eventually turns into an entire ecosystem of monsters. The standard graboid is the form most people recognize, a massive subterranean worm-like predator that hunts using vibrations beneath the ground. But after consuming enough food, the graboid eventually dies, only for multiple smaller creatures called shriekers to burst out of its body. Unlike graboids, shriekers can move above ground at high speed and hunt using heat vision, making hiding much more difficult. They reproduce rapidly, and the more they eat, the faster the situation spirals out of control. And then things somehow escalate even further with the final stage, the Ass Blaster. These creatures develop the ability to launch themselves through the air using explosive chemical bursts from their bodies, effectively giving them limited flight. Unlike the slower ambush-focused graboid stage, Ass Blasters are aggressive, mobile, and capable of covering huge distances quickly. Before dying, they lay eggs that eventually hatch into new graboids, restarting the entire cycle again. Mater, the ancient Jotun from the Ritual, is one of the most hopeless movie monsters to encounter, because she doesn't just hunt your body, she hunts your trauma, your guilt, and your mind. Unlike creatures that simply kill on sight, Mater psychologically breaks people down long before they die, forcing them into complete submission or a horrific death deep within her forest. According to the cultists who worship her, Mater is an ancient offspring of Loki that has existed for centuries inside the forests of northern Sweden. She appears as a massive elk-like abomination with glowing eyes, twisted limbs, antlers, and disturbingly human features embedded into her body. Her design alone feels unnatural, like multiple living creatures fused together into something not meant to exist. And because her body is partially covered in plant matter and bark-like textures, she blends almost perfectly into the forest around her. But what makes Mater terrifying is how intelligent and manipulative she is. She specifically targets emotionally vulnerable people, those carrying grief, guilt, shame, fear, or trauma. Once marked by her, victims begin suffering hallucinations, nightmares, and visions tied directly to the worst moments of their lives. She forces people to relive their trauma repeatedly until they mentally collapse enough to worship her willingly. Those who submit are allowed to live under her protection as part of her cult. Those who refuse are brutally sacrificed, often hung from trees deep within the forest. Physically, surviving Mater is almost impossible. She possesses immense strength, shrugs off bullets and axe strikes with little damage, moves silently through the woods despite her enormous size, and appears to have near total control over her domain. The forest itself almost feels alive around her. Victims become lost, disoriented, trapped in circles, and psychologically exhausted before she even fully reveals herself. And because she can shapeshift and create realistic illusions, you may not even realize you're looking at her until it's already too late. And the worst part is that escaping Mater isn't just about outrunning a monster, it's about resisting her psychologically. Throughout the film, she repeatedly forces Luke to kneel before her, offering the same false peace and immortality she offers her cultists. In many ways, Mater behaves less like an animal, but more like an ancient pagan god demanding worship through fear and suffering. There's technically one major limitation. Mater's power appears tied directly to her forest. Once someone escapes beyond the forest boundary, she cannot follow. But realistically, reaching that point alive while injured, terrified, sleep-deprived, and psychologically manipulated would be incredibly difficult for most people. The creature from The Host is one of the most terrifying movie monsters I remember watching as a kid. And before we continue, we're simply going to refer to the creature as a host throughout this segment, because I have no idea how to say the original Korean name, but I'll have the official name shown on screen. Unlike ancient gods or supernatural demons, the host was created entirely through human negligence, after large amounts of toxic formaldehyde were dumped into the water, mutating an aquatic organism into a horrifying apex predator. The result is a massive fish-like abomination, capable of moving through both water and land with terrifying speed. Its appearance alone is deeply unsettling. Gray skin, a segmented jaw filled with teeth, gills behind its mouth, a massive tongue, deformities around its eyes, and an unnatural body structure that looks like multiple sea creatures fused together into one living mutation. What makes the host especially dangerous is how unpredictable it feels. Despite its bulky appearance, it can sprint extremely fast, leap across terrain, climb underneath bridges, and use its powerful tail almost like an extra arm to grab prey. During attacks, it causes complete chaos within seconds, throwing cards aside, smashing through crowds, and dragging victims away before people even understand what's happening. And unlike many giant monsters that simply kill immediately, the host often captures people alive and stores them deep inside sewer systems to consume later. Victims trapped there are left injured, starving, terrified, and surrounded by partially consumed corpses while the host periodically returns to feed. One of its most disturbing behaviors is checking if prey is still alive by licking them with its massive tongue before killing them if they move. And once it finishes feeding, it regurgitates piles of bones and indigestible remains back into the sewer. Physically, surviving an encounter with the host would be extremely difficult. It shrugs off shotgun blasts, survives fire, tanks chemical weapons, and continues fighting after taking massive injuries. At the same time, it's also intelligent enough to fake being unconscious or lure prey into lowering their guard before attacking again. That combination of brute strength and animal cunning makes it far deadlier than just a mindless monster. And honestly, what makes the creature even more disturbing is that it's not evil in the traditional sense. It behaves more like a mutated animal walking through humanity's own actions, driven entirely by instinct and survival, which makes the entire situation feel far more believable and far more terrifying. The Smile entity from Smile may honestly be one of the most impossible movie monsters to survive. Not because it's the strongest physically, but because once the curse begins, you can no longer trust your own mind. Unlike creatures you can outrun or fight, the Smile entity attacks psychologically, slowly breaking its victims down over several days until they completely lose their grip on reality. The entity itself is an ancient demonic force that spreads like a chain reaction. Once someone witnesses a victim brutally kill themselves while wearing that horrific smile, the curse transfers to the witness and the cycle begins again. From there, the victim is psychologically tortured almost non-stop. Hallucinations, nightmares, fake conversations, disturbing smiling people, voices, missing time, and horrific visions begin escalating day by day, until the person becomes completely isolated and mentally shattered. What makes the Smile entity especially terrifying is how manipulative and intelligent it really is. It doesn't simply scare people, it studies them. It reads their trauma, guilt, insecurities, fears, and memories, then weaponizes those things against them. The entity often disguises itself as loved ones, therapists, friends, strangers, or even multiple people at once, making it nearly impossible for the victim to know what's real anymore. And the worst part is that the demon can manipulate perception so perfectly that victims may genuinely believe they escaped or defeated it, only to realize it was another hallucination the entire time. Its true form is far worse than the smiling hallucinations. Beneath the disguises, the entity appears as a towering humanoid monstrosity with multiple grinning mouths nested inside one another, long corpse-like limbs, distorted eyes, and an appearance so horrifying that simply witnessing it directly can send people into a catatonic state. And according to some theories within the films, every smile seen within its body may represent the trapped souls of previous victims it has consumed over time. The most hopeless part of the curse is that there's almost no real way to stop it. Traditional weapons are meaningless because the entity primarily exists within the victim's mind. It manipulates dreams, emotions, memories, and even physical sensations. Some victims attempt to break the cycle by isolating themselves or confronting the demon directly, but the entity repeatedly proves capable of twisting reality itself inside the host's perception. In many cases, by the time someone realizes they're hallucinating, it's already too late. There are only two known ways to survive. The first is to die completely alone without any witnesses, potentially ending the chain entirely, though even that is uncertain. The second, and far more horrifying option, is to murder another person in front of a witness, transferring the curse onto them instead, which means survival itself often requires becoming part of the monster's cycle. The xenomorph from Alien is horrifying because it doesn't simply kill you, it uses you. Every stage of its existence is built entirely around hunting, infecting, reproducing, and expanding its hive. And what makes the species so terrifying is that it feels less like an animal and more like the perfect biological weapon. At first glance, the adult xenomorph already looks nightmarish enough, standing roughly 7 to 9 feet tall. The creature possesses a black biomechanical exoskeleton, elongated head, razor-sharp claws, and incredibly long tail tipped with a blade-like stinger. And one of the most iconic features in horror history, its secondary inner jaw, which launches forward like a piston to punch directly through bone and skull. Its blood is an extremely corrosive molecular acid capable of melting through metal, meaning injuring one can be just as dangerous as fighting it directly. But the real horror begins long before the adult stage. The xenomorph life cycle is arguably one of the most disturbing in all of science fiction. It starts with an egg, which opens when sensing nearby life forms. From inside emerges a facehugger, a spider-like parasite that leaps onto a victim's face, wraps its tail around their throat, and implants an embryo down its host's airway. The victim often survives initially, only to later suffer one of the most infamous scenes in horror history. The chest bursts are violently erupting through their chest cavity while they are still alive. From there, the infant creature rapidly mutates into a fully grown xenomorph within only a few hours. Xenomorphs are unbelievably intelligent predators. They hunt silently through vents, ceilings, shadows, and darkness, often stalking prey for extended periods before striking. They can understand ambush tactics, environmental manipulation, and even teamwork. Some have intentionally sacrificed other xenomorphs so their acidic blood can melt through prison cells and contaminated units. Others have learned to operate machinery simply through observation. They aren't mindless monsters. They adapt, strategize, and evolve constantly. What makes the species even more dangerous is their genetic adaptation. A xenomorph absorbs traits from whatever host it was born from. Human-spawned xenomorphs are upright and intelligent. Dog-spawned runners become faster and more animalistic. And pred aliens born from Yautja hosts become stronger, smarter, and capable of reproducing in horrific new ways. This means that every outbreak can create entirely different variations depending on what organisms are nearby. And then there's the hive itself. At the center exists the queen, a gigantic reproductive matriarch capable of laying endless eggs while commanding their hive almost like a collective consciousness. Around her are warriors, drones, praetorians, scouts, carriers, and specialized castes all designed for specific purposes. Every member of the hive functions together with terrifying efficiency, almost like a living ecosystem dedicated entirely to expansion and survival. So how could you survive a xenomorph encounter? Honestly, your odds are extremely low. A single xenomorph is already powerful enough to wipe out entire groups of armed humans. They can survive extreme trauma, climb walls, move silently, detect prey through darkness, and attack from virtually any direction. Conventional weapons can work, but the acid blood creates massive risks during close combat. Flamethrowers, pulse rifles, and high-energy weapons appear almost effective, but even then, fighting one in confined spaces is practically a death sentence. And if you encounter more than one xenomorph, your fate is already sealed. So after looking at some of the most terrifying movie monsters ever put on screen, one thing becomes very clear. Survival against many of these creatures is almost impossible. Whether it's cosmic entities that manipulate your mind, unstoppable apex predators, parasitic organisms designed to spread endlessly, or ancient gods hiding deep within forgotten forests, these monsters go far beyond simple killers. They represent complete hopelessness, where even understanding the threat often comes far too late. And honestly, that's what makes movie monsters so fascinating. The best ones aren't just dangerous physically, they completely destroy the rules of normal survival. Some force you into silence, some hunt you psychologically, some evolve faster than humanity can react, and others turn entire cities into death zones within hours. But anyways, let me know down below which movie monster you think would be the absolute hardest to survive. And also let me know if there's any creatures I missed that you want to see in a future part. There are still countless horrifying entities out there that we haven't even touched yet. And as always, stay safe out there, and until next time, friends.